When my husband, Eden, told me he'd be leaving town for an extended work trip, I didn't feel worried or uneasy. He had taken trips like this before, and while I missed him during those times, I always believed that our bond was strong enough to withstand a little distance. Eden was the kind of man who could light up a room with his presence, and I always felt safe and secure with him by my side. But this time, things felt different, not because of him, but because of me. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was already feeling isolated. Maybe it was the routine of our marriage or the way life sometimes feels monotonous when you've been with someone for years. I loved Eden deeply, but there was a part of me that had started to crave something more attention, more excitement, something I couldn't quite put into words. I chalked it up to the temporary loneliness that comes with being apart from someone you love and convinced myself it would pass. Eden's departure day came and I stood by the door, waving goodbye as he drove off. He smiled at me through the car window, and for a moment I felt a pang of sadness. I promised him I'd keep myself busy, focus on work, and make the most of my free time while he was away. But as the days stretched into weeks, the silence in our home became deafening. That's when Robin started coming around more often. Robin had been a close friend of mine for years, even before Eden and I got married. He was charming, funny, and easy to talk to. He had a way of making me feel seen, like I wasn't just another person going through the motions of everyday life. Robin always seemed to know what to say to lift my spirits, and I welcomed his company as a distraction from the emptiness I felt without Eden. At first, our time together felt harmless. We'd grab coffee and talk about work or laugh about old memories. Sometimes he'd come over to watch a movie or help me with small tasks around the house. I appreciated having someone to fill the void, someone who made the loneliness feel a little less overwhelming. But looking back, I realize now that I was opening a door I should have kept closed. It wasn't long before Robin's presence became a regular part of my routine. I started looking forward to his visits, to the way he could make me laugh even on my worst days. He had this effortless charm that made him easy to be around, and I convinced myself there was nothing wrong with leaning on a friend during a difficult time. But there were moments, fleeting and subtle, when I felt something shift between us. I caught him looking at me a little too long when he thought I wasn't paying attention. His compliments, once casual and friendly, began to feel more personal, more intimate. "You're glowing today," he'd say, or "Eden's a lucky man." At first I brushed it off, telling myself it was just Robin being Robin, flirty but harmless. But deep down I knew better. I felt it in the way my heart raced when he was around, in the way I started to care about how I looked before he came over. The guilt began creeping in long before anything truly happened. I told myself it was all innocent, that I was overthinking things. Robin was just being supportive, helping me get through a rough patch while Eden was away. But there were moments when his hand lingered a little too long on my shoulder, moments when our conversations felt less like two friends catching up and more like something else entirely. One night, after a particularly long and lonely day, Robin invited me out for dinner. "You deserve to have some fun," he said with a smile that made me feel both seen and exposed. I hesitated but eventually agreed, telling myself it was just a friendly meal. But the way he looked at me that night, the way his laughter made me forget about everything else, had awakened something in me I hadn't felt in years. I didn't realize it then, but I was already standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering between loyalty and betrayal. Robin made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in a long time, and I was too blinded by the excitement to see the danger ahead. Eden trusted me completely, and I was about to break that trust in ways I never thought I was capable of. The night everything changed was one I'll never forget, though I wish I could erase it from my memory. It started out so innocently, just another evening where Robin came over to keep me company. We'd developed this routine in Eden's absence: casual nights of takeout, streaming movies, and chatting about life. It felt comforting, like a lifeline during a time when I felt so utterly alone. But that night, something shifted. Robin arrived with a bottle of wine, something he rarely did. "A little something to help us unwind," he said with his usual grin. I didn't think twice about it. I was used to his gestures of kindness, and at the time I thought of it as just another way he was trying to cheer me up. We settled in, pouring glass after glass as the hours passed, the wine loosening our tongues and erasing the boundaries that had always been there between us. We started talking about our lives in a way we hadn't before, about dreams, regrets, and the things we felt were missing. Robin told me how much he admired me, how he thought I was strong for holding everything together while Eden was away. His words felt like a balm to wounds I didn't even realize I had. "You deserve to be appreciated," he said, his eyes locked on mine. At that moment, I should have stopped everything. I should have set the boundaries that were already starting to blur, but instead I let his words sink in. They filled a void I hadn't been willing to acknowledge. I felt noticed, understood, and valued in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. As the evening wore on, the air between us changed. It became heavier, more charged. Robin moved closer to me on the couch, his shoulder brushing against mine. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining the tension, but my heart was racing in a way that betrayed me. Then came the compliment, soft, almost whispered. "You're so beautiful, you know that. Eden's so lucky to have you." His words sent a rush of heat through me, a mixture of flattery and guilt that I couldn't ignore. I laughed nervously, trying to deflect, but Robin didn't back down. He leaned in closer, his hand brushing mine, and for a brief moment I froze. I could feel the electricity between us, and I hated myself for not pulling away. What happened next felt like it happened in slow motion. Robin placed his hand on my cheek, his thumb gently tracing my skin. I knew what was coming, and yet I didn't stop him. Part of me was screaming to get up, to tell him to leave, but another part of me, a part one didn't even recognize, wanted him to stay. When his lips finally met mine, it was like the dam broke. All the loneliness, the longing, the craving for connection spilled out in that single moment. It was a kiss that shouldn't have happened, a kiss that would change everything. My mind was racing, filled with a million thoughts, but my body betrayed me. I kissed him back. The guilt hit me almost immediately, but it wasn't enough to stop what was unfolding. Robin didn't hesitate. He pulled me closer, his hands exploring in a way that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I told myself it was the wine, that I wasn't thinking clearly, but deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just about the alcohol. This was about a choice I was making in full awareness of the consequences. We didn't stop that night. I let things go further than I ever imagined I could, and with every moment I felt myself sinking deeper into something I knew I'd regret. Robin was attentive, passionate, and completely unashamed, while I was a mix of emotions: desire, guilt, fear, and a strange sense of freedom. It was like stepping into another world, one where the rules I had always lived by no longer applied. But as the night came to an end and Robin finally left, the reality of what I had done came crashing down. I sat alone in the quiet of my living room, the evidence of our actions still lingering in the air. My mind replayed every moment, every decision, every opportunity I had to say no but didn't. I thought about Eden, about the man who had trusted me to hold our life together while he was gone. I thought about the vows we had made, the promises I had just shattered in the span of a single night. And I thought about Robin, about how I had let him step into a space that was never meant for him. The weight of what I had done was unbearable, but it was too late to take it back. The line had been crossed, and there was no way to undo it. What scared me most wasn't just the betrayal, it was the part of me that had wanted it, that had allowed it to happen despite knowing better. That part of me was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize, but someone I now had to face. The morning after was a blur of emotions I couldn't sort through. I woke up to the soft light filtering through the curtains, but instead of the usual warmth that came with a new day, I felt an oppressive heaviness in my chest. My body was still, but my mind was racing, replaying everything that had happened the night before with Robin. Every touch, every glance, every moment of weakness, it all played on a loop, suffocating me with shame. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, unable to meet my own reflection in the mirror. How had I let this happen? I asked myself over and over. I had betrayed Eden, the man who trusted me completely, the man who had given me nothing but love and support. The guilt was unbearable, a gnawing ache that refused to let go. Part of me wanted to call Robin, to confront him, to figure out how we could make sense of what we'd done. But another part of me, the louder part, wanted to erase him entirely, to pretend last night had never happened. I didn't know what to say or how to act. Was I supposed to feel anger toward him, or was this entirely my fault? I had let it happen. I hadn't stopped it. And now I was left to deal with the consequences of my own choices. Eden called later that morning, his voice warm and full of love as he asked how I was doing. Hearing him made my stomach turn. He talked about how much he missed me, how he couldn't wait to come home and be with me again. Every word felt like a dagger to my chest. I tried to sound normal, to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the guilt seeping into my words. Did he notice? Could he tell that something was wrong? I hung up the phone feeling worse than before. I had never lied to Eden, not like this, and now the secret I was carrying felt like a weight I could barely hold. Every smile, every kind word he gave me only amplified the shame I felt. How could I face him when he came back? How could I look into his eyes and pretend everything was fine when I had betrayed him in the worst possible way? Robin, on the other hand, seemed completely unaffected. He texted me later that day, casual as ever, as if nothing significant had happened. Had a great time last night. Let me know when you want to hang out again, his message read. It made me sick to my stomach. How could he be so casual about something that had turned my world upside down? But the truth was, part of me wasn't angry with Robin. I was angry with myself. He hadn't forced me into anything. He hadn't tricked me. I had been a willing participant, and that realization made the guilt even harder to bear. I had no one to blame but myself. As the days went on, I tried to push what had happened to the back of my mind, but it was impossible. Every quiet moment brought the memories flooding back, and every time Eden called or texted, I felt like a fraud. I started avoiding Robin, ignoring his messages, and making excuses not to see him. I couldn't face him, couldn't deal with the casual way he acted as though nothing had changed. But even with the distance, the guilt didn't go away. It clung to me, a constant reminder of my failure. I started to notice the way it seeped into other parts of my life. I couldn't focus at work. I avoided social gatherings, afraid someone might see through me and uncover the truth. Even mundane tasks like grocery shopping felt overwhelming because I couldn't escape the voice in my head telling me what a terrible person I was. Eden's absence made it worse. I had no way to distract myself from the guilt, no way to pretend that everything was fine. The silence of the house felt oppressive, a constant reminder of the space I had allowed Robin to fill. And yet, the thought of confessing to Eden was unthinkable. I couldn't bear the thought of hurting him, of destroying everything we had built together. But keeping the secret felt just as unbearable. I spent hours lying awake at night, replaying every detail of what had happened, wondering what I could have done differently. What if I had stopped Robin that night? What if I had never let him get so close in the first place? The what-ifs consumed me, but they couldn't change the reality of what I had done. The guilt became a part of me, an invisible weight I carried with me everywhere I went. I thought about Robin less as the days passed, but the guilt didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger, a constant reminder of the line I had crossed and the trust I had broken. And no matter how much I wanted to go back, to undo it all, I knew there was no way to erase what had happened. It didn't take long for me to realize that Robin wasn't the person I thought he was. In the days and weeks that followed that night, his true colors started to show. At first, I chalked up his casual demeanor to a lack of understanding about the gravity of what had happened. Maybe he didn't fully grasp the emotional weight of our actions, or maybe he thought it was easier for me to move past it. But the more I observed his behavior, the more I realized that he wasn't burdened by guilt. He wasn't weighed down by regret. Robin continued to reach out, but not with the tenderness or concern I had secretly hoped for. His messages weren't about how I was feeling or how I was coping with what we had done. They were flirtatious, suggestive, even demanding at times. He acted as though what had happened between us was nothing more than a casual fling, a harmless indulgence in a moment of weakness. I tried to ignore him, to put distance between us, but he made it difficult. He'd text me at odd hours, sending comments that made my stomach churn. "You looked amazing the other night. "Can't wait to see you again," or "Missed you today. Let's hang out soon." It was like he couldn't, or wouldn't, acknowledge the pain and confusion I was feeling. At first, I thought maybe he was trying to make light of the situation to ease the tension. But as time went on, it became clear that he simply didn't care. Robin wasn't worried about the consequences of what we'd done or the impact it had on my life. He was only interested in what he could get from me. I started to feel used, like I was nothing more than a convenience for him. The attention and affection that had once felt comforting now felt hollow and manipulative. It wasn't about me, it was about him, about his needs and desires. I had been so blinded by my loneliness and vulnerability that I hadn't seen it sooner. The realization hit me hard. I had allowed someone I trusted to exploit me in my weakest moments. And as much as I wanted to blame Robin for taking advantage of me, I couldn't ignore my own role in what had happened. I had let it go too far. I had opened the door and allowed him to step into a space that should have been reserved for Eden. I thought cutting ties with Robin would be easy, but it wasn't. He didn't take the hint when I stopped responding to his messages or when I told him I needed space. He'd show up unannounced, acting like everything was fine, like we were still just friends. His persistence made me feel trapped, like I couldn't fully escape him or the choices I had made. One day, he confronted me directly, asking why I was pulling away. I tried to be honest, telling him that what had happened was a mistake, that I couldn't continue down this path, but instead of understanding, he brushed it off. "You're overthinking it," he said with a smirk. "It's not a big deal." His words stung. How could he be so dismissive of something that had turned my world upside down? I realized then that Robin didn't see me as a person with feelings, a person who was struggling with the weight of betrayal. To him, I was just an outlet, a distraction, a way to pass the time while Eden was away. That was the moment I knew I had to end it for good. I blocked his number, ignored his attempts to reach out, and made it clear that I wanted no part of his life anymore. It wasn't easy. Every time I saw his name pop up on my phone or heard a knock at the door, I felt a pang of anxiety. But I knew that distancing myself from him was the only way to start repairing the damage I had done to myself and to Eden. Even after cutting ties, the scars of what had happened lingered. Robin may have moved on, but I was left with the pieces of my shattered conscience. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had been played, that I had allowed myself to be manipulated by someone I thought was my friend. And worse, I couldn't escape the knowledge that I had let it happen, that I had chosen to betray the one person who truly loved me. Robin's indifference was a painful reminder of how easily trust can be broken, how quickly someone can take advantage of your vulnerability. But as much as I wanted to blame him, I knew that the responsibility ultimately rested with me. I had crossed the line, and now I was the one left to deal with the consequences. When Eden returned home, I was a mess of emotions. I had spent weeks dreading his arrival, rehearsing conversations in my head, wondering if he would sense that something had changed. Part of me hoped he wouldn't notice, that I could bury the truth and pretend nothing had happened. But another part of me, the part that was consumed with guilt, felt like I deserved to be caught, to face the consequences of my betrayal. The moment I saw him walk through the door, smiling with relief to finally be home, my heart shattered. He dropped his bags and pulled me into a tight embrace, holding me like he never wanted to let go. I stood there stiffly at first, overwhelmed by the weight of what I was hiding. But as he held me, I felt a rush of emotions: love, shame, regret. I clung to him, tears streaming down my face, and when he asked me what was wrong, I lied. "I just missed you so much," I said, my voice breaking. It wasn't a complete lie, I had missed him deeply, but my tears were about so much more. He kissed the top of my head and told me he missed me too, his voice full of sincerity and love. It hurt more than I could put into words. For the first few days after Eden's return, I walked on eggshells, afraid that he would somehow sense the truth. Every time he looked at me, every time he smiled or said something kind, I felt like I didn't deserve it. I avoided long conversations, kept myself busy with chores and errands, anything to distract myself from the growing tension in my chest. But the guilt didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing day. I couldn't look at Eden without seeing his trust, his love, his unwavering belief in me, and knowing I had betrayed it all. It was like a shadow hanging over me, a constant reminder of what I had done. I thought about telling him the truth more times than I could count. The first would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining how he would react. Would he yell? Would he cry? Would he leave me? The thought of losing him was unbearable, but so was the thought of continuing to live with the lie. One night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, Eden reached over and took my hand. His touch was gentle, reassuring, and it broke me. I turned to him, my heart pounding, and opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "You've been so quiet lately." I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. "I'm just tired," I said weakly, avoiding his gaze. He didn't push, but his concern lingered, and I could see it in the way he looked at me in the days that followed. He knew something was off, but he trusted me enough not to question it further, and that trust was what hurt the most. Eventually, I realized I couldn't bring myself to tell him. The thought of destroying his faith in me, of shattering the life we had built together, was too much to bear. I decided to keep the secret, to carry the burden alone no matter how heavy it felt. But keeping the secret didn't mean the guilt disappeared. It became a constant presence, an ache that never went away. I threw myself into being the perfect wife, hoping that somehow my actions could make up for what I had done. I cooked his favorite meals, planned special dates, and showered him with affection. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't deserve him. The experience changed me in ways I didn't fully understand at first. It made me more aware of the cracks in our relationship, the loneliness and disconnection that had led me to make such a terrible choice. But it also made me realize how much Eden meant to me, how much I valued our life together. I knew I couldn't undo what had happened, but I made a silent promise to myself that I would never let something like this happen again. I would work to rebuild the trust I had broken, even if Eden never knew it was broken in the first place. In the end, the secret remained mine alone. Robin faded from my life, a painful reminder of a time when I let myself fall into temptation. And while the guilt still lingered, I tried to channel it into being better for Eden, for myself, for the life we had built together. But no matter how much time passed, I knew the weight of my actions would always be with me, a scar that would never fully heal. It was a reminder of my flaws, my mistakes, and the fragile nature of trust. And though Eden never found out, the truth was something I would carry with me for the rest of my life.